They told me I had ruined their lives. My own mother said the world would be better if I didn't exist. My sister echoed every word, smiling as she watched me break. But instead of shattering, I walked out into the night with nothing but a backpack and a heart turned to stone. What they didn't know was that losing them wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Let's start from the night everything changed. My name is Clara Evelyn Monroe, and if you asked my mother to describe me, she'd probably say I was quiet the way people say a room is empty. I grew up learning how to fit into corners, how to take up less air, how to move through our small Midwestern town without making the floorboards complain. My sister Emily Monroe never had to learn that. Emily was the sun. People turned toward her, warmed their hands on her light. The rest of us were just weather. The difference between us wasn't subtle. It was ritual. Emily's laughs were proof of joy. Mine were interruptions. Emily's mistakes were growing pains. Mine were attitude. She earned the softest explanations, the gentlest tones, the sweetest slices of everything. I learned to make peace with crumbs. I can still see the broken vase, the one with the cornflower glaze my grandmother loved. Emily was twirling, showing off a new skirt that was so her, and the hem caught the coffee table. The vase shuddered, tipped, and exploded into blue shards across the hardwood. Emily gasped. I froze. Mom Diane Monroe came running, then stopped long enough to take in the scene and decide the story. Clara, she said in that low, disappointed tone that somehow sounded louder than a shout, why would you push her? Emily's eyes blinked at me, damp and startled, already being forgiven. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I didn't, I said, but the word was thin. A string snapped in the middle. Apologize, Mom said. And that was that. I picked up the pieces and apologized for the cuts. When Emily failed her chemistry midterm, I came home with my own exam, a careful A, fingers ink smudged from taking notes so small they had margins of their own. Mom didn't look at mine. She hovered over Emily at the kitchen table, arms around her like a barricade, whispering about second chances. Then she turned to me. You've been studying late, haven't you? She asked, like it was a crime. Your noise must be keeping Emily up. She can't focus with you clattering around. I studied in silence after that, the kind where even flipping a page feels like an apology. Later that spring, Emily fell out with her best friend Tessa, something about a secret told and a boy who saw too much. By Monday, I could feel the story settling like dust over homeroom. Clara said something. Clara's jealous. Clara wants what Emily has. It didn't matter that I'd kept my head down or that I barely spoke to anyone outside the library. The rumor reached home before I did. You need to be more supportive of your sister, Mom said, sliding a casserole into the oven like this was the kind of thing you could solve with cheese and heat. You have a way of putting people off. Emily drifted through the kitchen in a hoodie and eyeliner like smoke, not looking at me, already absolved. Don't upset your sister was the house rule that mattered. She's sensitive. She's under pressure. She's trying her best, Mom would say, as if the phrase were a shield that could only cover one daughter at a time. When Diane spoke my name, it usually came saddled to a chore or a correction. Emily needs quiet. Emily needs space. Emily needs this. What I needed was invisible, so I taught myself not to need it all. I built a life in the margins, library carols that smelled like old paper. The hollow thump of basketballs from the gym 2 floors down. The hum of fluorescent lights hanging like tired halos. I saved for paperbacks from the thrift store and stacked them double on my nightstand. I wrote index cards until my fingers cramped. I pressed college brochures flat under my mattress to keep them from curling at the corners, a little private geography of escape routes. After dinner, I'd walk the perimeter of our block, tracing the cracked sidewalks, listening to freight trains haul themselves west and imagining I could be one of them, heavy with purpose, unbothered by stops. Our town specialized in a particular kind of attention, the kind that noticed when you failed and treated success like a rumor. Emily was the exception. She got homecoming votes and extra credit. I got the librarian who smiled with her mouth, not her eyes, and slid me books like contraband. I liked it that way. Books never asked me to make myself smaller. I remember the exact moment I understood I would never be loved the same. It was my 13th birthday, technically ours, since Mom insisted on a joint party to save on costs and double the fun. The cake was white with pastel balloons piped on top, crowded in frosting that looked like a cheerful misunderstanding. The bakery had written our names in looping script, Emily and Clara. I saw it for a second in the kitchen light, perfect and improbable. Then Emily frowned. "It looks weird with both," she said, already picking at the flourishes with a fingernail. "Can't it just say mine?" "It's my theme anyway." Mom didn't hesitate. She reached for a butter knife and scraped. The sound a wet hush ran through me. When she was done, there was a blank scar of frosting where my name had been a smear of pink sugar letters, slumped on the paper doily like melting candy bones. "Don't make a thing of it," Mom said when she caught my face. "The store can't fit everything sometimes." I looked at the cake again, plenty of room where I used to be. We sang while Emily leaned forward into the glow hair lit gold at the edges by candlelight, friends chanting her name presents stacked like a skyline behind her. When I moved to take a breath and aim at one of the stragglers, she cupped her hand around the flame and blew again as if my wish were a draft sneaking through a closed window. The Polaroid someone snapped caught her smile and my half-shut eyes. Later, I found the curled pink letters, CLA, stuck to a napkin near the trash gummy with frosting the A tilting like it had tried to stand up and been told to sit. That night I lay in bed tracing the ghost of my name on my palm, the way kids practice signatures before they have anything to sign. The house creaked and settled. A car went by slow and uncertain. From the next room, I heard Mom tell Emily she was special, the words stretched thin with pride. I stared at the ceiling until the plaster constellations rearranged themselves into exits. I couldn't have explained it then, not in any way that would have satisfied a mother who believed cakes were just cakes and girls were what you called them. But I knew. The line had been drawn in frosting and in me clean and impossible to cross. The difference wasn't a phase or a misunderstanding. It was policy. That night, I stopped believing I had a family. By the time I was 17, my life was a careful performance. Perfect grades, perfect manners, perfectly quiet. I stacked achievement like bricks, hoping the wall would one day be tall enough for my mother to notice, to see me as something more than the shadow that followed Emily. I took AP classes, worked part-time to save money, stayed out of trouble. I thought maybe a scholarship, maybe a college acceptance letter would finally force them to say, "We're proud of you." But even then, Emily was always the headline. Emily had the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you'll never really be punished. She breezed through life like consequences were things that happened to other people. That fall, though her streak ended, she failed her calculus midterm badly. The grade was a bright red F that couldn't be explained away with charm or excuses. I remember coming home from my part-time shift at the library tired but humming with quiet pride because I'd gotten an early acceptance email from a university I'd dreamed about. I walked into the kitchen clutching my phone ready to share it, even though I knew better than to expect fireworks. Instead, I found Emily and Mom at the table, the exam paper spread out like evidence. Emily was crying the kind of tears that demanded attention, and Mom was stroking her hair, whispering promises about second chances. When they saw me, Emily's face twisted, searching for someone to blame. "It's your fault," she spat, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "You're always distracting me. You make me so stressed out just by existing." I froze. My acceptance letter seemed to dim in my hand. What I managed. "You sit in the living room studying all night, tapping your stupid pencil, muttering formulas. How am I supposed to focus with you around?" She shoved the test toward me like it was proof. "You ruin everything." I looked to Mom, desperate for her to set the record straight, but her face had already hardened. Lips pressed into that familiar thin line. "Emily has a point," Mom said. "You're always so overbearing with your studies. You could be more considerate. Not everything has to revolve around you, Clara." The sting of it hit harder than the words themselves. My entire life had been built around not making things revolve around me, And still, somehow, I was too much. The argument swelled like a storm. Emily slammed her fists on the table, voice rising with each sentence until the words cracked like thunder. "You've ruined our lives. Everything would be better if you weren't here." Her scream rattled me, but it was Mom's echo that broke me. Diane's voice cut through the air flat and sharp. "We'd be happier without you." I stood there rooted in place, hearing the finality in her tone. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't trying to scare me. She meant it. I waited for the part where she would take it back, soften, maybe even laugh and say I didn't mean that. But silence stretched between us, suffocating. Something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in surrender. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I didn't beg them to change their minds. I just turned, walked down the hallway and into my room. My hands moved on autopilot as I grabbed a backpack and stuffed it with what I could: 2 pairs of jeans, a few t-shirts, my toothbrush, my battered copy of Pride and Prejudice. My college acceptance email was still glowing on my phone screen, but it didn't feel real anymore. I paused at the doorway of my room, waiting, almost daring to hear footsteps behind me. A voice. Anything. But the house was still. Emily's muffled sobs. Mom's low murmurs of comfort. None of it was for me. I walked through the living room past the family photos where my face was always the one in the corner, blurred or cut off. I stepped out into the night, the air sharp and cold against my skin. My backpack weighed heavy on my shoulders, but it was nothing compared to the heaviness inside my chest. I had always imagined leaving would feel dramatic, like in the movies, tears streaming, maybe a final glance back at the house I was abandoning. But when the moment came, there was none of that. I didn't cry. I didn't even look over my shoulder. I walked down the cracked sidewalk past the hedges I used to hide behind during childhood games, past the mailbox where I once left a letter to Santa that Mom laughed at. Each step carried me further from the only home I'd ever known, though it had never really been home to me. The street lamps flickered halos of yellow light pooling on the pavement. I passed them one by one, the sound of my sneakers crunching against the gravel the only proof I was still there. My phone stayed dark in my pocket. No call, no text, no one asking me to come back. I reached the edge of town and kept walking, the night swallowing me whole. For the first time I was free, but freedom had never felt so cold. The first night alone felt like a dream I hadn't asked for. I checked into a motel on the edge of town, the kind of place with buzzing neon and doors that opened directly to the parking lot. The room smelled faintly of mildew and cigarette smoke, and the sheets were so thin I wondered if they had ever been washed. I paid with shaky hands, sliding a few crumpled bills across the counter, watching as my savings, just a couple $100s, shrank by the minute. The man behind the desk didn't ask questions, didn't even look at me. For the first time, that invisibility felt like protection. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed backpack at my feet, staring at the yellow light flickering overhead. Fear pressed against me, heavy and suffocating. I had no plan, no safety net, no one waiting to see if I made it through the night. My phone stayed dark on the nightstand. Not a single call, not even a message to ask where I'd gone. Sleep didn't come. I sat at the small desk instead, tracing circles on the wood with my finger, forcing myself to think. I didn't have much, just a stubborn brain that had spent years buried in books. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. By morning, I had made a decision I was going to survive the only way I knew how, through teaching. The next day, I walked into a cafe downtown, ordered the cheapest black coffee on the menu, and settled in at a corner table. The Wi-Fi was free, and that was all I needed. I opened my old laptop, the one with a cracked corner on the screen, and started applying for every tutoring job I could find. Math, English test prep. Anything that might catch a parent's eye. I listed my rates so low they barely covered my coffee. My pitch was simple, hardworking, patient, proven. For days, nothing came. I refreshed my email like it was a slot machine, hoping the right spin would deliver a lifeline. My money dwindled faster than I could ignore. Dinner became a cup of instant noodles, sometimes stretched into 2 meals. Lunch was whatever I could find in the dollar store bins. I learned to measure out peanut butter in careful spoonfuls to drink water when hunger clawed too hard. Eventually, I rented a room in a shared apartment with 3 strangers. We didn't talk much. They were just as lost as I was, drifters in their own ways. We crossed paths in the kitchen, nodding silently over the microwave, pretending the silence meant something. It wasn't family, but it was cheaper than the motel. Then finally, a breakthrough. One morning, an email blinked into my inbox. "Hi, Clara, we'd love to try a session for our son. He's struggling with algebra." My first student was a shy 14-year-old who mumbled into the camera on a glitchy video call. I spent an hour explaining equations in every way I knew how, drawing little diagrams, repeating myself patiently until his face lit up with the smallest spark of recognition. He got it. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of worth. After the session, his mother left me a review. "Clara is patient, kind, and explains things so clearly. My son is already more confident after one session." I stared at that review until my vision blurred. It wasn't just feedback, it was proof. Proof that I had something to offer, something the world wanted. More sessions followed. One student turned into 3, 3 into 5. It wasn't much money, barely enough to scrape by, but every payment meant another day I could keep going. I lived in a cycle of ramen packets, dollar store groceries, and late-night tutoring sessions. But I didn't mind. For once, no one was screaming at me. No one was blaming me for their failures. No one was telling me I ruined their lives. Loneliness was the hardest part. I'd lie awake at night in my small room, listening to the muffled sounds of my roommates through the walls, TV shows, laughter, sometimes arguments. I missed having someone to talk to, even if it was only to be ignored. But when the ache grew too sharp, I reminded myself silence is better than cruelty. Emptiness is better than being told you don't belong. In the middle of those long nights, resilience became my companion. I began to understand what it meant to build myself from the ground up, brick by stubborn brick. I wasn't waiting for anyone to rescue me. I wasn't begging for permission to exist. I was doing it myself. That stubbornness, that grit was the most American thing about me. My mother had always told me I was too serious, too intense, too much. But now those same qualities were the reason I hadn't collapsed. Resilience wasn't something I'd learned from her or from Emily. It was something I'd carved out of loneliness and necessity, out of the refusal to disappear. As the weeks passed, my tutoring calendar began to fill with colored blocks. Little victories stacked up: a student passing a test, another acing a quiz, one parent referring me to a neighbor. Each one reminded me that I was moving forward no matter how slowly. Still, survival was fragile. I kept my expenses low, my head down, and my hopes cautious. I knew that one bad week, one missed rent payment, one broken laptop could unravel everything I had built. But I also knew something else, something I hadn't felt in years. I had nothing. But for once, nothing was mine to lose. At first, the tutoring was survival. $50 here, $75 there, just enough to keep the lights on, keep the rent paid, keep noodles in the cupboard. But slowly, almost without me realizing, the numbers began to shift. Parents told their friends, friends told their neighbors, neighbors told their co-workers. Word spread like a quiet wildfire. Clara Monroe is the tutor who gets results. By my second year on my own, I wasn't just scraping by. I was booked solid. My inbox filled with requests from families across the country. Zoom sessions, email consults, late-night problem-solving marathons, it became my routine. My calendar was a patchwork quilt of names and times, and I loved every piece of it. For the first time in my life, I was wanted. Not because someone had to tolerate me, not because I was a convenient scapegoat, but because I was good at something and people recognized it. That recognition was addictive. It felt like oxygen after years of drowning. But as the sessions piled up, I realized a truth I couldn't ignore: tutoring one-on-one meant trading hours for dollars. No matter how many clients I took, I was capped. My time had limits, and my energy was finite. I needed something bigger, something that could grow even when I wasn't hunched over a laptop at midnight. That was when the idea hit me so clear it nearly scared me. What if I turned everything I knew into an online course? A complete SAT prep guide, structured, recorded, accessible anytime. Students wouldn't just get me for an hour, they'd get all of me packaged into something they could replay again and again. It was bold, almost reckless. But the thought electrified me. I pored over free YouTube videos on marketing, web design, and editing software. I devoured articles about sales funnels and click-through rates like they were novels. I built a website from scratch, fumbling through endless tutorials, breaking it 10 times before getting it right once. Every spare dollar I had, every single one, went into equipment, hosting fees, and ad campaigns. I even sold my old laptop to buy a decent camera recording lectures in my tiny bedroom with blankets tacked to the walls to muffle the echo. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I worked days with my private clients, then spent nights building slides, recording modules, and teaching myself how to edit out every awkward pause. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, my back ached from sitting in the same chair for hours, but I refused to quit. Failure wasn't just an option, it was the default I was running from. The first week the course went live, I sold 3 copies. 3. The money barely covered the coffee I'd guzzled while making it. But then something shifted. A student left a glowing review on a college forum. Another posted about it on social media. Word spread like wildfire in places I couldn't see, couldn't track. Within 2 months, sales tripled, then quadrupled. Then, my inbox exploded with testimonials from students across the country, kids who had raised their scores by hundreds of points, parents who called me a miracle worker, teachers who wanted to recommend my course to entire classrooms. The money followed. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to count every dollar before swiping my card. I moved out of the cramped apartment and into a sleek studio downtown, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the city lights like they were mine. I bought furniture that wasn't secondhand food, that wasn't shelf-stable. I even let myself travel, hopping on planes just because I could, just because the world was suddenly wide open and waiting. More importantly, I built friendships, real ones. People who knew me not as Emily's sister, not as Diane's afterthought, but as Clara Monroe. They respected me, laughed with me, wanted me around. For the first time, my name stood on its own. One evening, I stood in my new apartment, a glass of wine in hand, watching the city hum below me. The skyline glittered, the hum of traffic blending into something steady, almost symphonic. My course was selling daily. My tutoring calendar was full. My bank account wasn't a source of shame, but a measure of how far I'd come. I thought back to the motel room, the thin sheets, the fear pressing against me. And I thought back even further to the scraped-off birthday cake, the whispered, "We'd be happier without you." That girl, the one who believed she was disposable, seemed like someone else entirely. I lifted the glass in a silent toast to the reflection staring back at me in the window. I had built myself from nothing, I whispered. And I was finally someone. For the first time, I believed it. I set the glass down on the counter and reached for my phone, ready to text a friend about meeting up for dinner. But before I could open the app, the screen lit up with notifications. I froze. Mom 6 missed calls. Emily 8 missed calls. My hand tightened around the phone, heart hammering against my ribs. After years of silence, after making it perfectly clear I wasn't wanted, they were reaching for me now. The glass of wine trembled on the counter. And for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The sight of their names on my screen felt like a hallucination. For years, my phone had been silent when it came to them. No birthday texts, no holiday calls, not even a lazy, "Hope you're doing okay." Nothing. And now suddenly they were flooding me with missed calls like I was the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. I let the phone buzz itself into silence, my chest tight with something I couldn't quite name. Curiosity. Anger. A sick kind of satisfaction. Eventually, against my better judgment, I swiped and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hello." My voice came out sharper than I intended. There was a pause, and then I heard it. My mother's voice, trembling and sugar-coated in a way I hadn't heard since I was a child. "Sweetie, please. We need to talk." Sweetie. The word felt foreign, like it was meant for someone else. My throat tightened. What's going on, Mom? Another pause, the sound of her sniffing. We've fallen on hard times. Your sister, she's been having trouble at school again, and with everything going on, we just don't have enough. We need your help. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it, half convinced I was imagining the whole thing. When I pressed it back, I kept my tone flat, detached. Help? What kind of help? Money. She blurted the word, cracking on its way out. Your sister's tuition, it's due. And the bills, Clara, we can't pay them. I know we've never been there for you the way we should have, but please, we're struggling. We need you to help us. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I remembered her voice the night I left, cold and cutting. We'd be happier without you. The words had carved themselves into my bones, and now here she was pretending they'd never been said. I let out a bitter laugh that sounded like it belonged to someone else. You told me you'd be better off without me. Remember that. The silence on the other end was thick, broken only by her uneven breathing. And then another voice came on the line. Clara Emily. The sound of her name alone made my skin prickle. I know I was horrible to you, she said quickly, her voice high and desperate. But I need your help. I didn't mean it, all those things I said. I've been trying so hard, but I can't fix this alone. Please. Her words tumbled out too fast, too practiced. It didn't sound like remorse. It sounded like panic. I closed my eyes, forcing back the tidal wave of old memories. Emily's smug smile when I was blamed for her mistakes. Her laughter when Mom dismissed my protests, the way she stood silent the night I walked out. Now she wanted forgiveness, because it was convenient. You don't want me, I said, my voice low and steady. You want my money. That's not true, she insisted, but her voice cracked on the last word. Yes, it is. I snapped, my patience breaking. You didn't care when I needed you. You didn't even notice I was gone. And now you think I'll swoop in and save you. No. I heard her gasp, like she hadn't considered I might say no. On the other end, Mom broke in again, frantic. Please, Clara, we know we messed up, but we're your family. You can't just leave us like this. We don't know where else to turn. I laughed again, sharper this time, the sound jagged enough to cut. Family. You don't get to use that word with me. You had a family, remember? Emily was your family. I was just the mistake you tolerated. The silence that followed was almost satisfying. For years I had been the quiet one, the one who bit her tongue, the one who carried the weight of their cruelty without ever dropping it. And now finally, they were the ones speechless. It felt good. Too good. Rage burned hot in my chest, but alongside it was a cold, bitter satisfaction I hadn't expected. They needed me. After everything, after telling me I was worthless, after scraping my name off a cake, after telling me I ruined their lives, they needed me. No, I said again, firmly this time. Figure it out yourselves, just like I did. I ended the call before they could respond, my finger pressing the screen harder than necessary. The silence that followed was deafening but not empty. For once, I wasn't the powerless one. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there shaking with adrenaline. My reflection in the window looked different, harder, sharper, someone who had learned to survive without crumbs. I had wanted this moment for years, to finally have the upper hand, to watch them squirm. And yet, as the night stretched on and the phone buzzed again and again with unanswered calls, something inside me twisted. Not regret, not guilt, something darker. Because I knew one thing for certain, my refusal wasn't going to stop them. They weren't done with me yet. It was a week later when the pounding started. Sharp, insistent knocks that rattled my sleek apartment door, reverberating through the polished hardwood floors I had chosen so carefully. At first I thought it was a delivery mix-up, or maybe some neighbor who'd locked themselves out. But the rhythm of it, fast, frantic, almost panicked, made my stomach twist before I even rose from the couch. I crossed the living room, heart hammering. When I peered through the peephole, my breath caught. There they were, My mother Diane, her once proud posture wilted into something brittle, her face pale and streaked with exhaustion. My father Richard, a man who'd always hovered in the background, silent and complicit, now looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, like life had worn him down to the bone. And Emily, my sister, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, stood beside them. Mascara-smudged eyes, hollow hands shoved into the sleeves of an oversized hoodie. They looked like ghosts. My ghosts. A surge of emotions tore through me. Fury, adrenaline, and underneath it all, a flicker of unease that I hated admitting to myself. I hadn't seen them in years, hadn't imagined I ever would. They weren't supposed to be here outside my door in my world that I had built without them. I opened the door just enough to see them fully keeping my hand tight on the chain. My voice came out sharp, laced with disbelief. "What the hell are you doing here?" Diane stepped forward first, her eyes wide, wet, desperate. "Clara, please just hear us out. Hear you out." My laugh was brittle sharp. "You show up here uninvited after everything, and you want me to hear you out." Emily's voice broke in high and trembling. "Clara, please, I'm failing again. If I lose my spot, I'll never make it. We don't have the money. You could fix this. You could save me. Save her." The words twisted in my gut, absurd and insulting all at once. "You think I'm here to save you?" My voice rose, shaking with the force of everything I had swallowed for years. "You think I owe you that after what you did, after the way you treated me?" Richard shifted uncomfortably behind them, staring at the floor, his silence as loud as it had always been. He had never defended me, never stood up to Diane, never said a single word when Emily's lies crushed me. His presence now felt like salt in a wound. Mom's voice cracked. "We're sorry, Clara. We know we failed you, but we're struggling. We're losing everything. Please, we just need your help." Something inside me snapped. Years of bottled pain, of biting my tongue, of shrinking myself down just to survive it all erupted at once. "Sorry," I spat. "You're sorry now." Where was that when Emily smashed a vase and blamed me and you believed her? Where was that when she failed her exams and you said I was the distraction? Where was that when you scraped my name off my own birthday cake because it didn't fit next to hers? Their faces crumpled, but I wasn't done. The rage poured out, unstoppable, scorching. "You told me you'd be happier without me. Do you remember that, Mom? Do you?" My voice cracked, but I forced it louder. "You told me to my face that my existence ruined your lives, and you know what I believed you. I walked out into the night with nothing, and you didn't even look back. Not one of you." Emily's lips trembled, but I cut her off with a raised hand. "And you," I hissed. "My perfect sister. Do you have any idea what it was like to live in your shadow, to be blamed for every mistake you made, to be invisible in my own house while you soaked up all the love there was to give? You didn't notice when I left. You didn't care. You only care now because you want something." Silence fell heavy in the hallway. Diane's tears slipped down her face. Emily's shoulders shook, and Richard just stood there, hollow and useless. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling with fury but steady in resolve. "No, I don't owe you my help. I don't owe you anything." And with that, I slammed the door in their faces. The sound echoed through the apartment, a reverberation that seemed to shake loose years of weight from my chest. I leaned against the door, my breath-ragged heart racing. For a fleeting moment, I felt powerful, like I had finally taken back the voice they had stolen from me. But then through the wood, their voices began again, muffled, pleading, relentless. "Clara, please, just listen to us. Don't do this." Their words seeped through the walls, wrapping around me like chains. I pressed my hands against my ears, but I could still hear them, desperation scratching at the edges of my hard-won peace. They weren't leaving, and their voices haunted me through the walls. I stood against the door, their muffled voices pressing through the wood like smoke. Each plea bled into the next, a chorus of desperation I never thought I'd hear from them. My heart was pounding, my palms slick, but beneath the adrenaline there was something else, an anger that had cooled, hardened into something sharp and steady. I pulled the chain free and yanked the door open. They flinched as if the act itself was violent. Diane's mascara was streaked, her hair fraying at the edges like a rope pulled too tight. Emily's eyes darted anywhere but at me, her hands twisting in the sleeves of her hoodie. Richard stood behind them, stoic, broken his silence still louder than any words. For a moment, none of us spoke. The hallway air was thick, humming with tension. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to feel it, to sit in the discomfort they had never allowed me to share with them. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet, but it cut like glass. "You had years to fix this." Diane's lips trembled. "Clara, please." I raised my hand and she stopped. "You had years," I repeated firmer now. "Years to call. Years to admit what you did. Years to even try to make it right. And you didn't. Not once. You let me walk out that door like I was nothing. You let me disappear." My throat tightened, but I held their eyes, refusing to waver. "You don't get to come back now, not just because you're falling apart." Emily's face crumpled, the practiced apologies spilling out. "I know I messed up. Okay, I was a kid. I was stupid." I cut her off with a bitter laugh. "You weren't stupid, Emily. You knew exactly what you were doing. You had Mom wrapped around your finger and you liked it that way. You got everything you wanted while I got blamed for breathing. You don't get to rewrite history just because you're scared now." Her tears fell anyway, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, the sight almost pulled at me, but then I remembered the cake, the vase, the words, "We'd be happier without you," and my pity turned to steel. I straightened, letting the full weight of my voice fall. "I built my life without you. Every step, every dollar, every breath, I did it on my own. And I'm not going to let you drag me back into the pit you dug for yourselves. Fix your own mess." Diane gasped, a sound halfway between a sob and outrage. Richard finally lifted his eyes to mine, and for the first time I thought I saw shame there. But it was too late. Far too late. Without another word, I stepped back and slammed the door again. This time it wasn't just anger driving the motion. It was finality. Irrevocable. The echo shook the frame, reverberating through the apartment until it finally settled into silence. On the other side, their voices faltered, then quieted. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood, my breath coming in sharp bursts. A wave of satisfaction washed through me, hot, electric, undeniable. I had said what I needed to say. I had cut the cord, severed it clean. For the first time, I wasn't begging for scraps of love, wasn't shrinking myself to fit their twisted version of family. But underneath that satisfaction, a hollow ache stirred. It throbbed quietly, a reminder that no matter how much I hated them, part of me had always wanted them to want me. And now that they did, albeit for all the wrong reasons, I had shut the door on them forever. I crossed the apartment slowly, my feet carrying me toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out before me, glittering alive. Cars traced ribbons of light along the streets, buildings stood tall against the fading sky, and somewhere below, people moved through their lives unburdened by my ghosts. I pressed my hand to the glass, staring out at the skyline. For the first time, I understood the true cost of freedom. It wasn't just money or success, it was solitude. It was knowing that the family I'd once longed for no longer had any claim to me, and that in cutting them out, I had cut away a part of myself too. The city lights shimmered back at me, indifferent and infinite. My reflection in the glass looked strong, composed, untouchable. But inside I could feel the tremor of something softer, loss, longing, the faint echo of a wish that had never come true. I closed my eyes, letting the hum of the city swallow the silence behind me. My world was mine now. My life was mine. My success, my choices, my voice, all mine. And yet as I stood there with the skyline spread out like a promise, I had finally claimed a thought pressed into me like a bruise. Victory felt strangely quiet. The weeks that followed felt almost unreal. After the night of the doorstep showdown, after the slam of the door that felt like a thunderclap, Silence settled over my life like fresh snow. Cold, still strangely beautiful. My phone, once buzzing with their relentless pleas, became quiet again. No more missed calls. No more frantic texts. No more voices clawing at me through the walls. At first, the silence was jarring. I kept expecting the screen to light up with their names, expecting another round of desperate knocking on my door. But days passed, then weeks. And slowly I realized they weren't coming back. The noise that had once filled my head, the endless blame, the constant accusations, the weight of their demands was gone. And in its place, there was peace. I poured myself into my business with renewed focus. My course continued to sell reviews, glowing brighter with every update. Students sent me messages celebrating test scores that had once seemed impossible, parents thanking me for giving their kids confidence they thought they'd never have. Every email, every notification was a reminder that I was no longer invisible. I was seen, needed, chosen. The money grew too, but it wasn't the numbers in the bank that mattered most. It was what those numbers represented: independence, safety, the ability to choose my life without asking anyone's permission. I moved through my days with a quiet pride, knowing that every brick of this new life had been laid by my own hands. The bitterness that had burned in me for years began to fade. Not because I forgave them, not because I forgot, but because I no longer needed the anger to keep me standing. I didn't need their approval, their acknowledgement, or even their apologies. I had outgrown the version of myself that lived in their shadow. What replaced the bitterness was something softer: understanding, freedom. I found myself exploring new parts of the city, stepping into spaces I had once been too timid to enter. Bookstores where strangers became friends over shared recommendations. Networking events where mentors offered guidance without expecting anything in return. Cafes where conversations with fellow entrepreneurs stretched for hours, filled with laughter and ideas. These people weren't family by blood, but they chose me. They saw me for who I was, not who I had been told to be. With them, I wasn't competing with a golden child, wasn't apologizing for existing, wasn't waiting for scraps of love. With them, I belonged. I thought often about the difference between blood and choice. Blood ties had chained me, suffocated me, convinced me I was worth less than nothing. Chosen ties. These friendships, these connections lifted me, reminded me I was worth everything. It was a revelation that sank deep into me. Family isn't who shares your DNA. Family is who shows up when you need them, who celebrates your wins, who loves you without keeping score. There were nights when the ache still stirred, of course. When I remembered the child I had been staring at a scraped cake, wishing just once to hear my mother say she was proud. But instead of drowning in that longing, I let it pass through me. I looked around at the life I had built and realized that child had finally gotten what she needed, just not from the people she expected. One evening, I sat with a small group of friends on a rooftop patio, the city buzzing below us. We were sharing stories, trading jokes, passing around slices of pizza straight from the box. At one point, someone nudged me and said, "Clara, you're the glue here, you know that? You bring people together." I smiled, the words soaking into me like sunlight. It struck me then how ironic it was that the girl who once felt invisible had become the person others gravitated toward. That the daughter who had been told she ruined lives was now building them piece by piece in her own way. The contrast was stark, almost laughable. Blood had told me I was worthless. Choice showed me I was valuable. Blood had cast me out. Choice welcomed me in. For so long I had carried the weight of loss like an anchor, convinced I had been robbed of something vital. But sitting there on that rooftop, surrounded by people who chose me without condition, I understood something new. Maybe I hadn't lost anything worth keeping in the first place. Later that night, back in my apartment, I stood at the window overlooking the glittering city. The skyline stretched endlessly, alive with possibilities I had never dared to imagine as a child. I thought about my family, where they were, what they were doing, whether they were still struggling. But the thought no longer burned. It was distant, muted, like a story I had once read and put back on the shelf. I pressed my palm against the cool glass, smiling faintly at my reflection. The girl staring back wasn't broken anymore. She wasn't waiting for love that would never come. She was free. And in that moment, I realized something I had never let myself believe before. The people you lose aren't always worth keeping. Looking back now, I see the story differently. For years I told myself I was a victim of my sister's cruelty, my mother's favoritism, my father's silence. Later, I decided I was a survivor, someone who had clawed her way out of a toxic house and built a life from the ashes. Both versions were true, but they weren't complete. Because the truth is, I am not just someone who endured. I am someone who created. I created a future when no one gave me one. I created a home where I had none. I created success out of scraps and silence, brick by stubborn brick, fueled not by anyone else's belief in me, but by my own refusal to disappear. That I've come to realize is the real power, not simply surviving what tried to break you, but shaping something new in its wake. In many ways, my story is the story of resilience, the kind we like to tell in this country, though it often comes with more scars than glory. It's about self-reliance, about pulling yourself up even when no one's there to steady your footing. It's about independence, the freedom to decide who you are without asking for permission. And most of all, it's about choice. Choice is the most American thing I know, the ability to say no to, walk away, to decide what deserves your loyalty and what doesn't. My family believed blood alone was enough to demand my allegiance. But blood without love, without respect, without truth, that's not family. That's a cage. I didn't reconcile with them. There was no tearful reunion, no Hollywood ending where apologies smoothed over years of neglect. And I don't regret that. Forgiveness forced is just another form of obedience, another way of silencing yourself for someone else's comfort. I owe them nothing, not my money, not my time, not my healing. What I do owe is to myself. To the girl who sat in the library carols dreaming of escape. To the teenager who walked into the night with nothing but a backpack and sheer stubbornness. To the young woman who lived on noodles and Wi-Fi, who turned tutoring sessions into an empire. I owe her the truth that she was always enough even when no one told her so. And I owe something to the people who came later, the friends who chose me, the mentors who believed in me, the students who trusted me. They taught me that family isn't written in DNA. It's written in actions, in love, freely given in the steady presence of people who stand by you without needing a reason. That's the family I've claimed, the one I've built. Sometimes late at night I still think about my mother, my father, my sister. I wonder if they remember what they said, what they did. I wonder if they ever regret it. But the wondering doesn't ache the way it used to. It doesn't consume me. It feels distant, like a story that belongs to someone else. Because that's the truth of it. I don't live in their story anymore. I live in mine. And my story isn't about the girl who was discarded. It's about the woman who refused to stay that way. I used to believe closure meant answers, apologies, the past, wrapped neatly in a bow. But now I understand closure can be something simpler, a door shut, firmly locked, and left behind. The life beyond it isn't empty. It's expansive, full of air and light and room to grow. My family wanted me small, silent, invisible. But the life I built is none of those things. It's bold and loud, messy and real, stitched together by every choice I made when I decided I would not be what they called me. I no longer carry the weight of trying to earn their love. That burden is gone. In its place, I carry pride. Pride in what I built and who I became, and the fact that I turned their rejection into fuel. So no, I don't forgive them. I don't need to. My freedom doesn't require their repentance. My peace doesn't hinge on their approval. My worth isn't tied to their recognition. My worth is mine. My freedom is mine. My life is mine. I walked away once with nothing but a backpack and a hollow chest. Now I stand with everything I've created, my business, my friends, my home, my future, and I know none of it came from them. It came from me. And that's enough. More than enough. The girl they told would ruin lives ended up saving her own. The woman they said was better forgotten has become unforgettable to herself, to the people who truly matter. The family that cast me out doesn't get to define me anymore, because the door had closed for good, and on the other side, I finally found myself. And with that final door closing, Clara's chapter came to a quiet but powerful end. If you found yourself moved by her journey, consider subscribing to the channel for more stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and your voices matter here. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Served Cold. We'll see you next time.